Okay, superb. So hello, everybody who is arriving. You're in the right place. It's the RCA Service Design WiP show and our seminar on social resilience and impact. We're just going to leave it a few minutes while we let people arrive, and then I'll introduce the seminar, our speakers and the students, and hand it over to them. So just patience for a couple of minutes. Thanks very much. Welcome again to everyone who's joining. We're just going to leave it a couple of minutes whilst we let everybody finish their lunch, start their lunch, not quite sure. Join us anyway. Okay, I'll start my intro whilst remaining people come and join us. Welcome to the Service Design WiP Show 2021. Thank you. And yes, this is the Service Design, the RCA, Royal College of Art, Service Design 2021 WiP Show. I'm Clive Grenier. I'm the Head of Service Design here at the course, and I'm extremely proud to be showcasing across this series of events the work of 75 students who work as teams on 20 projects across 5 studios, which have been cut down to bite-sized chunks of 6 events over these next few days and cover everything from healthcare to urban renewal to next generation interfaces to social resilience and impact. The students you'll be seeing and the work they're presenting are these students. These are the students who were here on my first day back in September, end of September 2019, when I took over the course that had been running for about 8 years prior to that. Of course, we're all on Zoom now. And thank you for joining us on Zoom, but we can prove that we can still do some great projects, talk to great people, and put on a great event. When I started the course, I asked the students and staff to tell me about the values of the course, what the ethos was. And apologies to the students who've heard me say this a million times, but it's still worth saying, because we're very proud of what the course stands for and these icons that we created to help communicate that and apply it to different aspects of our projects. You can't be a service designer if you're not curious and really want to find out what's going on and have the courage to tell people what's going on so that we can collaborate with people to put it right and make better services, better experiences, transform cultures, make the world a little bit better. And in doing so, the students are dynamic, they're moving with the times, they create innovation as a result of what they do, and they're transformative. They don't leave alone, they want to change things. They're very people focused in every sense of that, human, community, society, and they care about the ecosystem we live on, the planet. And every single project that you'll see on this WiP show has a very strong sense of purpose and reason to be. So over these events, we're showcasing 20 different projects. Today, We're working on the largest chunk of projects, social resilience and impact. We'll be looking at sustainable solutions, 2 projects around commercial and community aspects of sustainability. We have 5 projects again on new interactions post-COVID, safe, zero touch, gesture, voice, different ways of interacting with services. This morning, we focused on the future of work and how speculative design techniques can help us look to the future and then come back to make decisions about now and look at how we really want to work and a stress-free, more human-centered workplace. We kicked off on Monday yesterday with people-powered health, 3 fabulous projects working on the topic of genomics, a fantastic scientific advance, one that has not necessarily been matched by a human advance in how we embrace people's decisions around their propensity for disease that is uncovered by genomic study. And citizen-centered, yesterday, we looked at how projects with Aalto University and UK high streets look to regenerate and work post-pandemic. And that is the theme of all these projects, regeneration. How do we go on and rebuild post-pandemic? And that's why we called this cohort of students Generation Regeneration. And these events are all about the chance to talk directly to students. So we have 2 fantastic speakers here today. You'll be getting pitches, short pitches on each of the projects. And then I will be inviting you to copy a link or press on a link which will give you direct Zoom access or Calendly access to book an appointment or go straight in and talk to students about the work they've done, why they've done it, where they are, what their plans are for the rest of their time at the RCA. It's as close as we can get to being in a physical room and just walking up to somebody and saying, so tell me what you're doing. Really encourage you to spend a little bit of time at the end of this event to go and talk to students. And if you can't do that, book up an appointment or come back, click on that link, put it in your browser history, come back at any time. There will be students there willing to talk to you. So as I say, a series of events that started yesterday, and today we've already had the future of work, and here we are with our second event of today, and tomorrow I'll be looking at interactions and sustainability. And for each of these, you will have the chance to focus on a smaller number of projects. You can explore our own website, rcaservicedesign.com. There is an RCA website, but this one allows you to navigate directly into the projects, see the students, use their Zoom links and Calendly to book an appointment to actually talk to them. So do take that. And at the end of the event, I'll be copying this URL that you see here into the chat. If I remember, I'll tell you all about it and encourage you to go and speak to the designers. They've worked hard. They deserve this. They've flicked through 2 lockdowns now, and they're still motivated, resilient, and inspirational, as you'll see. The 5 projects you'll be seeing today cover projects with a variety of partners. I'm missing one out here. I wonder if it's going to show if I click. Yes, it is. Projects with Aalto University, projects with Open Loop and Facebook, projects with Fair by Design, an agency looking at removing the poverty premium, and the UN Development Programme. So a tremendous array of partners. The secret weapon of this course, apart from its amazing tutors and staff, of course, is the partnerships, the people that are attracted to us to come and work with us, to work on live, real projects, difficult problems they want solving. And that's what we do. And that's the projects you'll see today. But before that, to get us in the mood and to inspire us, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Noel Hatch and Sarah Holliday to speak to us today. Noel, it's the second journey back to service design. Noel spoke at our seminar back in the summer, in July, when we graduated our students on what's next, as we were moving on from what we thought at that point, moving on faster probably than we ended up doing. But again, we asked that question of ourselves in this series of events. how are we going to regenerate? What's our post-pandemic positive futures like? And I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Holliday, co-founder of Telescope, to inspire us and inform us on social resilience and impact. So I'm going to hand back to the students now who are running this show, and I'll see you again at the end of the speeches and the project pitches to invite you to go and speak to the students. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Clive. We're going to have Noel as our first speaker. Noel, can you share your screen now?
Great, thanks. So as I share my screen, I just want to acknowledge how challenging it must be being in this context. It's challenging for all of us, but in particular, as you're kind of like studying and learning, like testing out what you're learning in a very different way than you might have expected when you started this course. So I'm really impressed and looking forward to the projects. And secondly, before I kind of take you on the journey, I've been working with RCA service design and with students since 2015, and I'm always positively surprised by the kind of the creativity and the kind of the energy that you bring into your projects, that you bring into helping tackle issues. And I see that with people that have graduated since from the RCA, in the kind of the different organizations that they're working on, how they're bringing that into the workplace. So again, looking forward to see your projects. But I'm going to take you on a journey to Camden in terms of how we've been looking at social resilience and impact, and we're going to kind of like focus in on the scale of a neighborhood, which is kind of the spaces where people live, where people interact, where people go to school or work or consume. And particularly during the pandemic, we've often been restricted by only being interact in our neighborhood, not being able to travel any farther than that, and that's brought us closer to our neighbours, not necessarily out of choice, but in terms of what we can and can't do. And so coming into Camden's got a diversity of different neighbourhoods, some of which are more famous than others, and they've each got their distinctive identities, whether it's kind of the punk rebellious spirit of Camden Town to kind of the theatre capital of the West End, through to kind of the knowledge quarter and international transport hub that is King's Cross, through to kind of the more leafy Hampstead. And those are all platforms for communities to bring their distinctive identities and create new local economies that come out of that, which also change the way that culture is created, and that people and neighbourhoods build their resilience around that. And we've got a kind of a civic identity and civic brand that we've developed called We Make Camden, which is about breaking down, what everyone feels they belong to Camden, but like making that real for each neighbourhood, so that for each neighbourhood you can see kind of what makes it resilient, what makes it impactful. And our kind of theory of change around like how we transition is really is really uncertain. Like we don't know what is going to take place, and so kind of we're really looking at what are the things that we can respond to from those external forces. So the different changes, be that the virus itself, be that the kind of the wider impacts, but also what can we learn from, and what can we support from the margins to what's under the radar. So not necessarily what's being developed by big organizations like ourselves, or big employers or developers or other institutions, but actually innovations like growing at the grassroots. And that's really a way for us to look at actually how do we develop the resilience of those neighbours, and what infrastructure do we need to help scale or grow or partner other organisations that are developing that to develop. And so how we're navigating that is really starting from the lives that people are living, and those lives are very different to what they would have lived before. In fact, they are for all of us. But more often than not, we will understand the lives that people lead from those that use our services, unsurprisingly. But there are many more people who don't use our services, who are invisible to us, who are even invisible to community organisations or charities. And so finding ways to help them share their lived experience of what they're going through, kind of materially in terms of being able to make a living, but also psychologically as well. And actually think about the different scenarios that we might live in the future, whether that's in the next 6 months or the next year, not to predict like what the future will be and to pick what the most likely scenario will be, but actually to help people imagine and actually prepare and anticipate for different scenarios, so they can look at how they can help each other, whether that's as individuals or as neighbours or as organisations, whether you're a local business on the high street or a big charity or an informal network. And then looking at actually like what are the things that we need to bring back that we'd lost from before the pandemic, and what are the things that we need to reinvent that no longer make sense, and that actually we need to really kind of think differently about what we do and how we work with our communities. And this kind of diagram or graph by Dan Hill kind of really puts that into perspective. So often you'll see graphs about the virus, and actually this graph, which isn't statistical by the way, it's here more as a kind of a visual metaphor, is really thinking about actually if our relationship has changed in terms of kind of our homes being used as offices or nurseries or care homes or schools, if our like streets are now being used as the only place where we can access food or essentials, and our public spaces in our neighbourhood the only places where we can connect with others and actually kind of enjoy culture, then what does that mean for the neighbourhoods as an economy and as a kind of a set of different infrastructures, whether that's how we get around, whether that's our high streets, or whether that's the services that provide support to people. And so kind of we scaled up a variety of different services to respond to kind of the crisis, through to helping people who are at the point or on the cliff edge, through to other people who want to help out. We want to move from that kind of that intensity and that pace that we had in the first lockdown to actually thinking, yes, if this kind of situation lasts, we can't just be in an emergency response, because more often than not that leads to like prescriptive top-down way of working. But actually, what are the different assets and resources within our neighbourhood that are important to us, and like how are they being supported and how resilient are they? And we know through globalization that actually, if we take food as an example, food is more often than not at a local level. There's no influence on it. We get the food in our supermarkets through a variety of means that don't take place at the neighbourhood level. But we've seen also with the pandemic that actually food becomes so essential to people that actually we do need to start relocalizing that in terms of production, in terms of delivery, in terms of wider forms of growing, that then help us think about actually what do we need to reinvent? How do we reinvent the supply chain and the role that communities have with that? And so for councils, we're often seen as either paying for other people to deliver services on our behalf or delivering services ourselves. But there are a wide range of different levers that we can use, bringing people together around a common cause to tackle a challenge as urgent as food poverty and as long-term as climate crisis, through to looking at ways that we finance differently, or ways that we might regulate differently as well, in terms of both positive behaviour change or acting as a deterrent, and looking at our role as a customer of goods. So we spend money on construction, or we will spend money on food. Actually, what should we expect of our own supply chain, and how can we build that resilience of the supply chain, which then becomes a resilience for our communities? And then that brings me back to the fact that our neighbourhoods are very distinctive. So while we might have some very common needs, and we've definitely seen that through the pandemic, we can't design point solutions which work for the whole city. Actually, we need to look at the strengths and capacities that each neighbourhood have, and beyond the kind of the practical strengths and capacities. So you might have a strong cultural sector or a strong digital sector in a neighbourhood. Actually, like, what are the identities that make change happen? So, if I compare a neighbourhood like Kentish Town, where there's a very high level of community activism and entrepreneurship, the way you develop the resilience of a neighbourhood needs to reflect that. Whereas if you're, let's say, in Euston, where actually there's much bigger institutions but lower levels of residential community, then the way you do that might be more through partnership and how you use the spaces of those big organizations. And some of the changes that we're seeing kind of means that actually, when we talk about social resilience, we need to think about social resilience for the next 5 years or even 10 years, particularly when it comes to building infrastructure like housing or transport or businesses, because those are things that take time to develop. And so we know that majority of our infrastructure is designed for 20th century living. You can see that in the number of car spaces there are, how big roads are in comparison to pedestrian paths or even on public spaces. And so designing for the next 5 years creates resilience which isn't like dependent on a particular institution, but actually where our natural and social infrastructure can grow and support some of that wider physical infrastructure. And we're seeing, like I said, kind of a variety of different trends, and some of those trends will last, some of those will go when the pandemic goes, but we need to look around to see how those trends are manifesting, and those trends won't be manifesting within each of us in the same way. And for councils, councils live in their own in financial environment, and their own relationship with central government as well. And you might have seen there are councils within the UK that have gone bankrupt. And so, when we talk about our role and the different roles and different levers that we play, we also need to think about our own resilience as organisations. And that's as much for councils as it is big institutions that have a strong influence on a neighbourhood. So that could be a really big employer, it could be a big property developer, a big housing association, it could be a big business. So when we think about the resilience and kind of impact we want to have in our neighbourhoods, we need to change the business models of our own organisations to be able to do that, because otherwise the resilience of the neighborhood will be insufficiently strong. So we did some research on different types of neighborhoods, between those that have got high levels of what we call networked capital. So that's where be strong levels of community activity that can very quickly mobilize to tackle issues in a very agile way, and have got strong relationships between small and big organizations. Others where like that's very isolated, there's very little social infrastructure. The high streets are very empty, there's very little visibility of public services. And then other neighborhoods which are dominated by big regeneration schemes, where much of the services are privatized, and so there's very little space for community activity and for different communities to come together. But what might this look like in practice? Well, actually we need to think about the roles of different people. So between the role of a council and the role of a resident, if we take tackling waste, which is a big issue for people on their doorsteps and also for the climate crisis, actually between your free cycle initiatives where people can share like disused goods, and between your gritters that come out and clear the snow, which is massive infrastructure investment, which is very much the role of councils. Actually, there are intermediaries which kind of broker interaction between residents and councils. So library of things, where people can rent out equipment borrowed by others and that is invested in by a council, or Fix My Street, where people can share what's wrong in their neighborhoods and councils can work with those residents to tackle those issues. And then there's something practical about which design, and which I know our RCA service design is very good at, which is about designing and bringing to life what the future could look like in very tangible but also imaginative ways. So here are 3 examples. One which is around crowdsourcing ideas for improvements to our roads to make it easier for people to walk and cycle. Another is imagining you're on a treasure island and you needed to develop a new library, and that's to help improve our libraries. And then another one is a treasure hunt with a local market to look at the different strengths and assets that different community actors have got between newcomers and people that are very well established. And then there's examples about ways that bring to life the neighbours we want to live in. So we can, develop big visions and use big words, but actually it's only when we start to see our high streets changing, even if that's a shop by shop, that people start thinking differently. And so I've given some examples here to a library of things that I mentioned, which we're bringing to Kentish Town, that Think and Do space, which is a kind of a collaborative community space where people can do different things to tackle the climate crisis. And an example which isn't in Camden, but which is in Washington, which is a whole path which was turned into kind of a Black Lives Matter logo to bring to life that urgency and that movement. And so going back to how do we actually embed this, there's something about bringing to life the kind of the neighborhood and the resilient infrastructure you need, even if that's small, and using that to embed into wider strategic planning or visions, but showing and engaging with people about what are the things that they need to have resilient lives. Working with your partners, with your strategic partners that have got different resources and skills to councils, and by that I mean employers, but it can also be startups, it can also be community champions, so working at different scales. So shared the example of the living room. This is some of the ways that it's kind of been shaped and tested, and then kind of trying to codify as we learn, like how well that's working and at like different stages. We know that working with communities, as we're designing, there's, as you know, different stages of design, and some we work more effectively at others. So we're constantly trying to adjust to the new environment and do that in a way which works inclusively with our communities. And then, like I said, I think really focusing on specific challenges that you want to focus on that bring people together. So we found food as a very good way of doing that, because it speaks to everyone, and it relates to people in different ways, and the use of physical space, both outdoors and indoors, again, to bring to life and to make as a way of visioning the future. And then, you know, being playful about this. If there's one thing that we do need, it's to bring hope and fun into like what is like a really difficult time. And so, as much as we need to make serious commitments as councils or as institutions, we need to, if we're going to think differently, we need to. The only way I found to be able to think differently is, one is to give people time, and the other is to help people be playful, because that's a way you can challenge yourself and challenge each other in a way which is non-confrontational but also convivial at the same time. So that's a whistle-stop tour of a kind of our emergent journey in Camden in terms of how we support the resilience of our neighbourhoods. All of this is in a very uncertain time, so we're kind of learning as we go some of the things that we've learned from before, and other things that we're kind of experimenting. So none of this should be kind of taken as being the answer to any like challenges that you're tackling within your projects, but it's just kind of sharing our work in progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noel. Then we have Sarah as our second speaker. Hi, Sarah.
Yeah, hi, and thanks, Noel. That was really inspiring to hear what you've been doing. Let me share my screen. And just to echo Noel as well, I'm so impressed with what you've been doing. Can everyone see that okay? Yeah. What you've managed to achieve in the last year with everything that's happened. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your projects later. So yeah, I'm Sarah. I'm co-founder of a social enterprise called Telescope, and then I also work at Nesta Challenge as an organisation. I'll speak a bit about both of those today. So it's 2021, and as we start the year, it's kind of feel like there's quite a big task ahead of us all, doesn't it? Here we all are, and you guys are all graduating later this year from the RCA, equipped with all the tools of service design, and we have a world that's in crisis. We have the COVID crisis, and we still have the climate crisis, and then we have this crisis of inequality. These are all global crises, and they're all growing more and more urgent. And you know, these are really wicked problems. They're complex and they're systemic, and they're all very much interdependent. So it definitely feels, for me at least, like a big task ahead if you're a social innovator who wants to drive this kind of regeneration and social impact that we're talking about today. And we're all searching for what that social impact should be and what we can be doing to help to drive it and to be that the generation regeneration. And I actually started my career as a scientist, actually just across the road from the RCA, Imperial College in London. And there I was developing this new generation of solar cells that were going to be cheaper and more lightweight and flexible, like this one that's in the picture. And I present at lots of conferences about how these new technologies would solve all the problems of energy access across the global south. The idea is that everyone would have access then to cheap and reliable electricity. That's what we thought. And I know that's very easy for a scientist in the lab to say, but we weren't really thinking about how that was actually going to be rolled out in the real world. Like most of my colleagues, we just kind of talk about it at conferences and write papers, but we never really went and spoke to the people who would be involved in that system, the people who are going to be, manufacturing these cells in the factory, and the truck drivers who then have to drive them across these unpaved roads, and the local electricians who'd be installing them. And obviously, most importantly, the communities who would be then using them and maintaining them every day on the ground. These people, they rarely have a voice in the kind of innovations that we're developing on their behalf. When we actually, of course, went and spoke to these communities, we realized that there were all these challenges that we hadn't really thought about and hadn't realized. Unfortunately, this kind of top-down, I think, solutions-driven approach to problem solving is still the dominant one across most of society. Obviously, you've been learning different approaches, but for people like me in labs developing solar energy technologies, that's still the main approach. And certainly the other thing we've seen is that in government and in policy, in Whitehall, that is also the main approach. I just want you to have kind of reflect for a moment about whether you have ever directly contributed to any piece of government policy that kind of affects you. Maybe you have. If you have, then please do put it in the chat. I'd love to see. And then I guess I want you to think about whether you've ever been impacted or been frustrated by an item of government policy that impacts you. Usually when we think about that, there's quite a lot more things that we, are done to us that we are affected by than what we actually have impact on ourselves for most of us. And across the country, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are working in these frontline delivery roles. Like in the news stories here, we've got our frontline health staff that are particularly at the forefront of our minds right now while they're tackling the COVID crisis. But then we also have quiet heroes across our care sector and teaching and social workers across local authorities and in charity sectors. We have our probation officers and employment advisors. All these frontline staff who have years of experience and all these broad, deep insights into the social problems that we're facing in the UK. These are the people that I found myself working alongside when I was working at the Bromley by Bow Centre in Tower Hamlets in London in 2018. So these frontline staff, it was their job to be delivering vital services like health services and employment advice and welfare advice. And they were the ones who were implementing policies like universal credit rollout day to day. And I was just so struck by the insights and the ideas that they all had about how certain policies were or were not working. But nobody was asking their opinion from government about how these policies were made. Their voices weren't even being, listened to, certainly not being heard in Whitehall. And then the thing is, there's lots of people also in Whitehall who want things to be different. And it was while I was working at the Bromley by Bow Centre that I met Ruth and Hebe. We were all doing a social innovation programme called Year Here. So Hebe was also working in the charity sector and seeing the same kind of frustrations I was, while Ruth had left her job in Parliament because she was just so frustrated with being detached from the real world and developing policies for people that were based on reports and statistics, not the experiences of people who are actually living and tackling those issues on the ground. And she, like many of her colleagues, were full of good intentions, wanting to serve her country, but they were all operating in this siloed system where there's so little opportunity to collaborate across those divides. So we decided to set up a social enterprise called Telescope, which is a learning and accelerator program designed to bridge those divides between policymakers and frontline workers. It's designed to create a safe space for them to be able to share those insights and understand each other's challenges, and then work together to solve those problems. So when we started, of course, our programs were in person. We would take policymakers outside of their comfort zones and they would shadow frontline staff on the ground. And then we would use tools from active listening and service design and systems thinking to help them to share those insights and develop collaborative solutions together. And we found that people really valued this opportunity actually to connect just on a human level. People told us that it really felt different from the kind of tick box consultations that they were used to taking part in. And having this time and space meant that they could move past their preconceptions and actually find practical ways to work together. And then, of course, last year, COVID hit, and like lots of social enterprises and small businesses across the country, we had to then quickly decide what to do. So while we were all transitioning to working from home, we had our frontline workers still out there on the ground tackling the crisis firsthand. It's almost like this dichotomy was becoming even more clear, because we have policies that were changing fast. We have the government trying to keep up with the changing situation. And we all went out and did a clap for carers, but still the voice of those carers in that decision-making process, was being largely unheard. So it was really clear to us, and from all the people that we spoke to last year, that this kind of connection was needed more now more than ever, I guess. So we quickly pivoted and started delivering our programs online, like lots of programs did last year. So since last year, we've been matching people up through Zoom, either in pairs or in larger cohorts like this one shown here. And we've continued creating that safe space for them to be able to share their experiences and listen to each other without judgment on a human level. And then thanks to Miro and other online tools, we can still use systems mapping and service design, journey mapping, all the tools that you'll be familiar with using, to try to share those and help them to kind of think through problems. I mean, with lots of people that we work with in the public sector and across charities, those kind of tools and ways of working are not really widely used. And so this is actually something that's quite new to people and quite exciting ways of working. So by using these, they've been able to kind of work together on shared challenges. And yeah, I guess the people who can join our programs, they all have a certain spirit, which is partly a frustration with the status quo and that they're operating in, but also this sense of possibility that things could be different and an appetite to change things. So people like Sarah, who's a probation officer and a mum of two, who took part in one of our first online pilot programs last year, alongside Tom, who's a civil servant in the Ministry of Justice. So Sarah and Tom hit it off straight away. They realised how much they shared in terms of values and the change they wanted to see. Through the course of the programme, they worked on a new initiative to improve diversity, inclusion and frontline representation in the MOJ. And Sarah talked afterwards about how she felt more empowered from this. She said, I didn't know how to go about making change before, but now it seems clear. All it took was just creating that time and space to build the connection with someone and learn the kind of tools that you will all be familiar with. They were already social innovators. They just didn't have the opportunities to kind of live as one. So here we are, looking forward to 2021 and the future. So I think there's some really exciting opportunities for rebalancing power in social innovation and social impact. Noel's spoken about some of the exciting initiatives they're doing at Camden, but I think there's a real opportunity to build social innovation that's more collaborative and more inclusive and more responsive. And one of the tools that we use quite a lot in our programs is around systems mapping. So systems thinking is really important because it helps us to see that there's not one person who can see the whole system, and neither can they change the whole system themselves. I love this quote from Donella Meadows, who's one of the modern founders of system thinking, that thinking of systems makes you stop pointing the finger and looking at who to blame. Instead, you start looking at how all the different variables and actors interact with each other. And you realize that it's often those interactions and feedback loops that are actually the problem. So then if we're going to start thinking of systems, we need to also start working in systems. So that's why we try to bring together the different actors in the system together. On the homelessness program that we're running right now, we have frontline workers from charities and people from local authorities, actually some people from Camden Council. And we have an MP and someone from MHCLG, and we have people who have lived experience of homelessness themselves. And so it's by bringing those different perspectives together that we're able to actually kind of create that, all those different perspectives and create that safe space for collaboration, because that always starts with human connection. And then I think it's also about remembering that service users themselves are not just these kind of inert actors who are just done to, that as we sometimes are tempted to think of service users, that, you know, service users are also complex, dynamic individuals, and they also have a role to play in this system. They have a role in determining their own. I love this graphic from Ted Hunt that reminds us of this, like users, we think of users in a certain way, but users are also people. And this is the kind of mindset shift that we're really trying to bring about in our participants. And we're still, as Telescope, we're still quite early in our journey. we're helping to build these one-on-one connections now and change people's mindsets around policy and around co-design and collaboration. And what we hope is that we have this ripple effect of people changing their ways of working to become normalized across government for, for in the future, we have all people in the civil service thinking that this is the way of working that they should approach, that they wouldn't hesitate to pick up the phone to frontline staff and ask their advice on something. We want to create a world where this kind of co-design of government policy is the normal thing to do, where everyone has a say in it. And then, yeah, we think that social innovation shouldn't be limited to Silicon, well, any kind of innovation really shouldn't be limited to Silicon Valley or research scientists like I was, or even service design graduates like you'll be. We all have the capacity to be innovators and to be change makers. So I think it's important we always ask ourselves what we can do to empower others, to empower those unheard voices and the unusual suspects. It's really great to see the kind of approaches that Canton are taking to inspire communities and help them imagine the change that they want to see and be empowering people at a kind of a local and community level. We've really found in our programs that so many people, especially in the front line, feel very disempowered to make change. Policy just seems like this black box, and that they don't feel that they're part of that decision making. They don't feel like they have any of the tools or the permission to experiment and make change, and also like not having the time. I think Noel's just kind of alluded to that, and we've spoken about this before, is that people, especially right now, people on the front line are so rushed off their feet firefighting day to day that they don't have that time to step back and to reflect and to try doing things differently. And then there's also a certain, I think, mindset or a certain resistance in mindset, maybe in the public sector, that's really understandable when you think about the kind of fail fast approach that we have in our innovation mindset and entrepreneurship, where it's like, there's nothing to lose, you try it, it fails, try again. We think about in the public sector, you've got this responsibility to be designing and delivering services and policies for the country. It's very difficult to have that same mindset of kind of prototyping and failing and trying again. So I think while there's so much benefit from learning these approaches, there needs to be an understanding of the kind of the context that we were working in and the kinds of, I'm sure that you've experienced, all of you who've been working with public sector kind of organizations have experienced this. And I think it's really important that we have empathy ourselves and try and understand the context that we're coming from. And this kind of empowerment is also something that we're focused on with Nesta Challenges. So that's where I work when I'm not running telescope programs, my other hat. And at Nesta Challenges, we're all about finding those unsung heroes and unusual suspects, the people across society who have great ideas for tackling social problems, but aren't normally invited to do anything with them. So we use challenge prizes as a structure that can help them take those opportunities and develop solutions. And the Affordable Credit Challenge was one of those prizes that we ran that supported partnerships between community lenders, so credit unions in the UK, and fintech companies. So we helped them to work together to develop new technologies that would increase access to affordable credit. So credit unions themselves are not very well known for their kind of innovative approach, but through this prize, they were able to partner with a fintech company and together work to develop new solutions. And one of the winners of that one was a collaboration between the police credit union and a fintech company called Credit Kudos. And they developed a reward loan solution that was using open banking, and it would help police and armed forces who had a poor credit rating to be able to access affordable credit. And similarly, we ran a prize, the Data-Driven Farming Prize, which supported agri-tech companies in Nepal to work closely with smallholder farmers in Nepal and help them to develop tools together that was around providing actionable insights and information around climate and weather data that would help them with their crop yields. So those farmers had the ideas and they had the insights, just like the frontline workers were spoken about. They just needed the opportunities to be able to work with someone to build the solutions together. So that's the kind of work that we try to do with Nesta Challenges. And then the third thing, is around social innovation that's responsive. I think we're all really attracted to those flashy, sexy solutions that's around, a revolutionary new technology or some exciting scalable business model or both, or, exciting solutions. But sometimes that can, I think, lead us to be a bit solutions driven. And I'm sure you know about this pitfall as service designers to start with the problem and to start with the users. But I think it's a real temptation when you kind of move into the innovation and the entrepreneurship sphere to design that really exciting solution, when sometimes actually the innovation that's needed is actually pretty straightforward and simple. I think quite a nice example of this is the project that was run by University Hospital Bristol that involved actually just introducing a safety checklist to help reduce incidents in A&E. They found that lots of them were caused by patients who were deteriorating or had delays in care. And with this very simple checklist, it sounds very, very basic, very boring, but it was massively effective in terms of reducing the incidents in A&E. So it's that we don't always need a fancy algorithm or something that's going to look great in a pitch deck. Sometimes it's just something quite simple that to be effective innovation. And I think that's why it's so important that we have innovation that's driven by people on the ground who really understand those daily challenges. And I think sometimes that involves us as designers or innovators maybe letting go of our egos a little bit, whether that's on a kind of personal level or an organizational level. We want to be the ones that design, to be the heroes and design the great solutions, but actually sometimes it's something quite simple that's needed. So yeah, that's my key aspirations for this year and going forward, is that we can build social innovation that's a bit more collaborative and more inclusive and more responsive. And I think there's a role for all of us probably, and to be asking these questions and challenging the status quo wherever we go next in our careers. To not try to be the heroes, but to be enablers. So I think that's really thinking about social resilience and impact, and be that regeneration generation to build back. I think it's that kind of humble approach and enabling approach and collaborative approach that we really need to be able to move forwards from the crisis. So yeah, love to chat to any of you about this. Great that you'll be able to share your link, and hope to reach out to some of you and hear about your projects. But please do get in touch with me as well. I like to kind of learn from others and expand my own thinking. So yeah, please do get in touch. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it's really interesting to see the conversation between Noel and Sarah as a comparison from the different sectors. And if anyone wants to ask the question to Noel and Sarah, you're welcome to leave the message in the chat, and we will ask the question in the Q&A session later. And now we're going to have our students' project pitch. As I'm sharing the screen, Aditi can prepare.
Thanks, Hortense.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Aditi Soni, and this is my project, Portfolio Exploration Toolkit, in collaboration with the United Nations Development Programme. Next slide. This intervention is a guide created towards easing out the onboarding journey for the UNDP country offices while adapting to new systems innovation methods, like thinking in portfolios of solutions for their upcoming projects. Next slide. Some context about these new innovation methods. UNDP is currently moving to new frameworks of innovation for systems transformation across many regions that focuses on shifting from single point solutions to a portfolio of interconnected interventions for what we refer to as today's wicked problems. These frameworks are new and usually involve a back and forth journey between the innovation units and the various country offices that engage with it. Next slide. Since these processes are new, there is a lot of ambiguity, lack of trust, and unpreparedness from the country office's side, adding to the hand-holding needed from the innovation teams. To eliminate this chaos and to embed more trust in the system, there needs to be distribution of decision-making, as well as a way to involve colleagues early onto the process with respect to their individual needs and process familiarity. Therefore, this toolkit is a platform to choose their way through the new methods based on the country office goals, process familiarity, acting as a bridge to share essential onboarding information even before they start. To be more goal-driven, the narrative of this tool is centered around the needs of the country offices via various features and offerings like advising on competencies needed during the process, connecting with other teams and countries and regions that have already used this approach in the past, and much more. As a result, this helps team members in being informed, involved, and also shifts the perception of country offices from resistance to intrigue at the least. If you want to know more about my project or my experience of using service design practices while working with the UNDP, please feel free to reach out to me via the Zoom link in the chat or my contact details mentioned here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aditi. And the next team, we have Valeska or Benny.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, okay, Christoph.
Yeah, hi. So today we'd like to present to you Alto Culture Fund, turning the way public funds are managed upside down. So from top-down administration to bottom-up communities, creating a participatory and democratic funding process, allowing citizens to craft their own city in a way never done before. This is all enabled by a platform ecosystem composed of innovative, resilient, and sustainable business models and service touchpoints. So let's go into the problem. Our proposal addresses the failures of past urban design paradigms, prioritizing objects such as cars, aesthetic buildings, roads, parking lots, you name it. In this case for Alto, people are not attracted to live here and are not happy and don't feel safe. And from our research, we learned that even students are scared to walk at night due to the shocking emptiness. So we learned that apart from students, no one actually lives in the cities for these reasons. So instead, our proposal advocates a paradigm shift for urban design, tapping into the potential of collective work towards better solutions versus the top-down elite approaches enabled by emerging distributed technologies. And this is solving the leading cause of Alto's struggle to attract and empower local and international talent, support its spirit of collaboration and creative culture. Our human-centered participatory approach aligns with the campus strategy of being an innovative hub by focusing on its arts and cultures. That's our entry point. Now, this is all enabled by our theory of change, making its first step towards its future as a creative capital. So thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs that enable this. So we designed Alto Culture Fund as a financial community instrument. This would be the next slide, that uses invested capital towards mission-oriented cultural programs for the city. So this is not just a traditional fund. It's composed of, and the next slide will show you this, novel service touchpoints, business models, and decentralized processes, such as our proposal for a decentralized commission. So let's focus on that. So our communities participate in public spending of its capital. So this is the decentralized commission, and it's composed of local leaders, business owners, and city stakeholders that directly pursue arts and cultural missions. This model avoids the bottleneck of outdated leadership models or government budget cuts, making it resilient to change, which is very relevant to the situation we are in right now. So to date, we've prototyped the participatory methodology and validated the potential interest of local leaders and the founders of Alto, and tested an MVP of our first cultural intervention, an artist in residence program. So the team consists of service designers from the world's leading design program, as you know, published researchers, design psychologists, also having experience in building innovation programs with cities. Our philosophy is viewing designers as catalysts and integrators to set in motion positive social change. So this idea can be appropriately scaled as a methodology, which you can see in the next slide, to help similar cities and areas with similar issues to Alto, to adopt this bottom-up participatory mission-oriented funding model for urban redevelopment. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to chatting to you.
Thank you, Christoph. Next one, we have Melanie.
Thanks, Hortens. So hi again, my name is Melanie, and my project FI-AI got developed with the ultimate goal to help AI developing companies to avoid harmful socio-technical impact with the support and involvement of the public. Because Something that applies to all of us is that artificial intelligence is increasingly but invisible and a silent part of our everyday lives. And its major purpose is to make processes more effective, and a lot of applications of AI target humans directly in super convenient and often helpful cases like spam filters, Netflix, Spotify, Amazon recommendations. But 2/3 of the people are using it without even knowing that AI is the technology behind. And the question is there a need to explain AI? And I found that people were saying, you probably don't care as long as the AI system does a good job. But the other question is also, what if it doesn't? In this case, experience unintended negative short or long-term impacts can have different levels of consequences on people, their direct, indirect surrounding, as well as the providing companies and the environment. So examples can be wrong healthcare diagnosis, or an AI that selects just a certain kind of people for an application process, or even a law enforcement. But this question remains, why should we explain impact once something went wrong if we could avoid it happening in the first place? So working around these questions, I've developed the Foresight Impact Assessment for AI, which is a two-staged impact assessment from regulators for companies that consists in phase 1 of a platform for impact self-assessment. And in case an AI model would be categorized as a high-risk application, a game to test wider social applications by the public in order to help the companies develop responsible AI products in collaboration. And if you want to know more, feel free to reach out to me and join me in my Zoom room. And I hand over to what is it?
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Next one we have Sharanya or Sharon.
Hi everyone. We are For You With You, and we are a team aims to bring inclusivity in regulatory bodies. So in the UK, 14 million people who live in poverty pay for extra service and essential goods and services. And this is what we call poverty premium. So the challenge of poverty premium can be addressed with more inclusive regulatory practice. Next, please.
Financial regulators want the best for consumers of essential services. However, there are challenges. Regulators are empathetic, but they're empathetic to people like themselves. So it's hard to comprehend that a vulnerable consumer from a completely different background makes decisions different from them. The consumers and regulators also don't speak the same language, and the vulnerable voices aren't being accurately represented. All of this makes it difficult for regulators to visualize the aggregate impact of their regulations on the daily lives of their consumer. So we asked ourselves, how might we convey the relevance of lived stories to help regulators make inclusivity a regular practice?
So we collect these stories and channelize lived experiences into a series of touchpoints for regulators to consider different voices in the decision-making. So first, we gain the interest of the regulators and channel it into action. Then we promoted obligatory and regular practices and recognize their efforts. And finally, we keep intervention relevant using templates to update the above tools regularly. So with all our effort, we hope to drive more inclusivity in the regulators. At the end of the day, we all want more inclusivity, and we think our solution takes us all one step closer to this dream. If you want to find out more about our work, have a chat with us on Zoom, and we are looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And the last one we have Ken.
Yep. Hello. We're Together Auto team with Julio, Itsu, and Kenjiro. This is a collaborative project with Aalto University. And our project name is AHA, a work performance platform to help students work better, giving them the ability to manage their time in a more efficient way. The focus of our project is student mental well-being in Aalto University. Students' mental well-being is the central concept of Aalto campus strategy, and our research shows that there are two important areas for students' mental well-being, which is study productivity and social connections. So we set our goal as to create a healthy campus community with reduced study-related stress and richer social connections. We worked on this project with co-design approach in collaboration with students, teachers, student associations, and mental health service providers, conducting two really successful online co-design workshops to crowdsource ideas and validate them together. Our service is integrated with physical working space, which is called AHA Space, and virtual working space and AHA App. With AHA Space and AHA App, students have the flexibility to choose what suits them the best to achieve their study success in the supportive system together with their peers. This service inspires and encourages students to develop self-learned skills that benefit them even after their graduation. So if you are interested in knowing more about how the AHA works, come talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really nice to hear everyone's projects. And now I've seen some questions in the chat room, and then we can have some discussion with the speakers and the students. Now, do you want to share some of your feedbacks? Or Sarah? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Would you be able to repeat that? My connection's going a bit.
Oh, I was asking whether both of you want to give some feedbacks to the students' project, and then we can go on to the Q&A.
I'm happy to jump in and give some feedback. What I think cuts across all of them is to be able to have a kind of a big complex challenge to work on, but really to dive in forensically and identify kind of the specific issues that are maybe creating some of the barriers. And some of those are kind of in terms of tackling social issues, and some of those are kind of at the more organizational level, like the project working to help improve portfolio approaches. And so, I suppose I've got a question back, which is, as the students have been working on projects, kind of what have they been able to learn from each other in terms of things from one project that can help another, particularly from those projects which are maybe more about the enabling ways of working, to those which are more supporting residents directly.
I think Sharanya's group or Benny's group and Aditi maybe have some thoughts on this.
Sure. I can start. So I think for me, one of the biggest learnings has been to see how a bottom-up and a top-down approach work parallelly, and how can they almost complement each other, because in our projects itself, there's this diversity of how to empower people or citizens, and at the same time empowering organizations. And I think that's a really well-balanced trick to have in an approach that you take.
To add to that, actually, as a team, we were looking at how inclusivity is, great in theory, but it doesn't always reflect in practices. And it's not because the organization doesn't want it to be. It's more, ensuring that everybody's on the same plane and has the same goal. And sometimes in larger organizations working across different types of communities and challenges, we find that that's a huge consideration to take into when you're thinking about how to approach a problem.
Sarah, you have any feedbacks on this one?
Yeah, I thought they were all really exciting projects, and all really, I guess the best solutions are always the ones that seem really obvious afterwards, once you've come up with them, right? And I think they all seemed like those kind of projects. It's just that seems like such an obvious thing that's needed. And I guess I'd be interested to hear more about the barriers or the kind of reception that you've had and with the clients that you've been working with. I guess I'm thinking about, for example, the AI toolkit. Do companies want to be able to reveal themselves in terms of the kind of how, whether they're opening this black box of AI and how inclusive it's making it. Is there an appetite for that among the kind of customers you'd be looking at? And I guess similarly, thinking about participatory funding, you know, what are the barriers to participatory funding right now? And are organizations and local authorities really, do they have that appetite to really take it on board? I guess it's thinking about going from a great idea to actually being able to implement it and having people say, and this links, I think, to something that people were saying in the chat about the kind of the resistance at a higher level to actually try new things. And so I'd love to hear more from all of you about how well those projects have been received, and whether those organizations you're working with are really on board with taking it forward. Because not saying that you have to do that, because that's really challenging for anyone that's bringing a new idea, but I'd love to kind of hear more about how they've been received and how you plan to really roll them out.
Yeah, so for the question part, we have Alex. Alex, are you here? I think he left 2 questions for Sarah, maybe. Okay, he's not here. Sharanya, you have the question for the decentralizing, the power part?
Sorry. Like here. Sorry. I just like see in the chat like Alex is here. So don't know.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't get him. So maybe Sharanya can go first.
Sure, yes. I think it was almost a reflection when both of you were speaking. Thank you, first of all, for the wonderful talks. It was really interesting to see the work that's being done. And the idea of decentralizing the power to make a change within organizations, and all like identifying change makers within organizations really stood out to me, and I thought it was really interesting. My question was, where do we begin with this? And what is the culture, what is the importance of creating this culture of innovation within the organization itself? It's for both Noel and Sarah.
I think you should go first, Noel, because you're speaking from direct experience within the organization.
No, you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. So I think one of the things that I've found most important is to find the people in the organization that are trying to instigate change in their own way, in their own teams, and kind of to support them, and kind of and also grow that that way of organizing across other people as well, because I think it's whatever team you might be in, I think it's difficult to be able to create a culture across the whole organization, because there's so many different cultures within an organization. So I think identifying your change makers who are doing that already, and supporting them and joining them up with others is really important. Telling stories, I think sharing those stories, I think is really important as well, because it's then you've got a diversity of language and methods and examples that different people can relate to. And then I think the third one is to identify those issues that people from different teams can work on. So kind of for example, circular economy is one where you need to work in so many different different levels, work as well, food. So I think those are really good ways, and then that way you can kind of curate a space where people can lead in different ways, and then they embed the lessons and the impact from that back into their teams. So yeah, those would be my kind of practical tips.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is very similar. It's the kind of, you start with the, I guess, the early adopters, or whatever you'd like to call them, but there's always someone, like you say, there's lots of different cultures within these organizations, whether you're talking about public or a third sector or private sector. And we find with our programs, it tends to be like slightly self-selecting almost. And there are those kind of change makers, like you say, Noel, and you can call them like entrepreneurs, the people who are frustrated with the system and they want things to be slightly different. And they're the ones that I guess we try to support to be able to lead the way and to start trying to make those changes and hopefully inspire others. I think it is still challenging. Like we still have very hierarchical organizations across most of society. And so that does come to a point where some more junior staff might come up with a great idea and work collaboratively on something, and then ultimately the leadership says no. And unfortunately, that is something that we experience a lot. And I don't know whether that's in your experience that is an issue, but I think you definitely need, I can't remember who said it, but kind of the top down and bottom up approach that you need to take of changing the mindset in the leadership is also a big challenge.
Great. Next one we have Richard.
Hello, thank you very much. Firstly, thank you for the presentations from the speakers and the students, all really interesting. I'm a guest. I worked with two graduates last year, and Menali was our co-facilitator on the service design masterclass as well. Hello, Menali. So my question relates to some of the topics you brought up. Actually, it's for both Sarah and Noel. I don't know if Sarah wants to go first and then Noel. So it's about a recent meeting that I've had, and I think this will happen to all service designers in their career at some point, is when you're trying to persuade the benefits of a service design, human-centered design thinking approach to a group of executives that it's relatively new to. And this was a nice executive team that I was meeting with, but the response to a case that put forward for design thinking was, I've not got to where I am, not knowing what people want. So it kind of links in with, I think, what you were saying, Sarah, about hierarchy. And I know anybody that's worked in local authority will have experienced that sort of hierarchy. And it's prevalent in lots of other areas as well, not just the public sector. And I put in my question as well, there's probably a piece of research that lots of people know about, where CEOs were tested on the same psychopathic indices as Broadmoor inmates, and chief executives scored similarly on the psychopathic score as what inmates did in Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital. So it's just like, when you've been in that situation, persuading an exec team, a chief exec, what's been the most staunch, stubborn, person that you've had to persuade, and where you successfully sort of brought them around to a way of thinking towards service design and human-centered design thinking, and what was it that clicked for them or for you? Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess the barriers, we've certainly experienced resistance, and maybe it comes from a slightly different place in my experience, in that I find with a lot of central government teams especially, they think they're doing it already. You kind of talk to them about this collaborative approach, co-design, working with frontline services, and they obviously are disillusioned in thinking that they already take that approach, despite the fact that you speak to every frontline sort of organization in that sector and they are furious with that. I won't name any departments, but it's like they never speak to us. We feel completely detached and there's little communication, and yet the sort of the government department thinks we're already excelling in that area, and so it's quite difficult in that scenario to persuade them that they're actually not doing such a good job as they think they are. And in terms of people who have kind of come on our programs, I think it links back to kind of what I was saying earlier, that it's not so much thinking I've got this far without it, I don't need this. It's more just that it's very culturally difficult to use these kind of approaches, and I think there's a certain type of public servant mindset that is quite safe and quite, I guess, respecting the hierarchy and the approach that is, we make sure that if we're going to if we're going to roll something out, we've tested this, we've kind of tested it and have done lots and lots of studies. They will commission lots and lots of studies, and that's their sort of way of thinking that they would, they're very sure about something. The idea of prototyping is like just very scary, I think, because it's very, it's because that would mean having to actually test something with real people, and you're responsible for those people because you kind of are responsible for that area of policy or local government. So I think I haven't personally experienced the kind of that ego part of it, but it's more of the difficult cultural mindset shift that I think the only way we try to overcome that is by sort of learning. I keep talking about safe space, but doing that, learning by doing. And so by having running these activities in our programs where they're not actually working with real people, they're doing it in a sort of hypothetical space, and they realize that it kind of works and it's actually quite a useful way of thinking. And then we hope that then translates into them doing it in the real world. So that's my experience.
Yeah, and I'd say my experience is, one I'd say is probably kind of worse is when you don't get any feedback because they don't want to justify like why kind of why they don't want the project to kind of to happen. But also when what people want from the co-design is actually the visual aesthetic and the getting stuff done quickly. But then when they find out that actually it means uncertainty about what the outcome will be, and some some difficult conversations when you try and work out in the open, they close that down. They were like, oh, I thought that person that did that really great presentation had, they don't quite say it like this, but had some really cool images. They want, that's what they want out of it, and they came to that really quick solution. I'm like, yeah, that's probably the story that they've told you to try and get you to commission them. But actually, what's most important is actually that residents feel involved. That's the initial impact, actually, before you even get to an impact of trying to tackle a difficult issue, which we know takes can take a while and can take a different sets of people. Is never going to be perfect. So sometimes I think people confuse co-design or service design with something that looks visually great and tells a great story with what the actual impact should be, which is working with the strengths and motivations of different sets of people, and being able to test different ways of doing things, in particular things that surprise and challenge you, because otherwise we could have done it ourselves if we were going to do something that we knew what it was going to end up with.
Thank you.
We have another question from Sharon.
I think my question is covered by the Sharonya's one, so I think it's okay right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I think everyone's questions being answered. Clive?
There was a question from Alex for the students, I think.
Oh, anyone? Alex, do you want to come up and ask the students?
Yeah. Can you see me? Oh, yay.
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, the convenient post-it note stuck on my camera. Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite realize, I've dropped out for a moment, so I didn't quite realize that the questions were for Noel and Sarah, so apologies about that if it was a bit sort of weird. I was just blown away by the the solutions, the project stories, and such like. And what I'm intrigued by is this idea that, well, I'm not an expert, but my assumption is that funding in social design in the public sector is extremely limited, and you probably need to prove and demonstrate, where the value is going to be and how much it's going to be. So therefore, what have you, this is to the students, what have you learned from what you've created that could actually be applied or scaled to other audiences in other contexts at minimal cost? So if you've done the hard work in generating a solution, how easy would it be to to maybe tweak that solution so it works for a whole other group of people? That's the question. Thanks.
Maybe I can have one input for this. Our project was about with the Aalto University, and Aalto University is really trying hard to cope with the student mental well-being, and they're hiring the counselors and the psychologists to help it, and also made a kind of they're doing a lot of things, like they're doing a survey to the students and get that feedback to actually change the academics, the faculty part, and dealing with the student mental well-being and the war situation. But our solution, we got a feedback saying that this solution can be really, really easy, and our solution is really, really simple. So it's not have like the cost need a lot of cost, and can be implemented very soon, and maybe it can be really expanded to the other university as well. So this kind of feedback, we didn't actually have really detailed business model at this time, but this feedback was really impactful for us.
I guess sorry.
Okay, so I'm so sorry. So like we are 4 years with you, and because like we are aiming to like bring the inclusivity in the regulations in this project. So right now we use different like stories, and then we translate it into like different tools for the regulators to really understand like how the consumer look like. So we think this kind of the Amplitude tool, for example, the persona or the customer journey map, or this kind of the interactive game can just help the people really understand how they treat their customers, or how do they want to like change their lives better. So I think this kind of maybe these tools or different scenario can be used in different fields. For example, can be also used in the banking in the company for them to realize like how does their like customer look like, or how do they maybe make better services for them to like change their lives, or just to do more like positive impact to the society. So I think this kind of the scenario we built can be just like can be transported to the different like fields in a quick way. And this also like what we learned in this project, like how can we really listen to people's voices, and how can we like empower people with their voices, and we just use this kind of tool to maybe make their voices can be heard by the different like regulators or different like workers in a different industry.
Yeah, and just to jump in here as well, part of kind of working on a project like a campus redevelopment, by focusing on arts and culture, you're obviously the main assumptions are that it's undercuts. They're not always lacking public funding. You're always like risking failure or bankruptcy. So there's actually a lot of potential, and we've read a lot of case studies to study these. I sent a link in the chat. This is a European-wide study about using business model innovation, where a lot of consultants worked on kind of art and cultural organizations that are less than 50 kind of people, staff, these kind of things, where they're actually using new kind of business models. So we were inspired by is kind of this cooperative model. So you're actually using the fact that you're underfunded as a power. So you're flip-siding that assumption that underfunding is actually a problem. Because you can actually, if you are an organization like that, there are a lot of resources, there are a lot of opportunities. So I'd really recommend you to read a report like that. There's another area in Italy. I think there are a lot of Italian designers that use this in kind of a basis as social innovation. They found out after the financial crisis in 2008, these cooperative companies actually increased in profits after the crisis. So it's actually, there are a lot of these hidden tactics and case studies that show a lot of promise, and I think we can learn a lot from that. So just wanted to put that into the chat.
I think I'll step in if that's okay with everybody, because we're nearly out of time. First of all, I want to say thank you to all the people who've come and watched this event today. Thank you very much. But I want to say a special thanks to Noel and Sarah for two really yes, inspiring, but wonderfully pragmatic and oxygen pumping speeches that I think show us the way and show us the common sense and practicality that's often behind service design, the different thinking, the impact it can have. I personally felt that, incredibly encouraging, actually, to see real impact and see the work you're both doing in quite different ways. So thank you so much for coming and speaking to us and to our wider audience. I want to thank the wonderful students. I really love these projects. I think they are amazing. And, they've only just come out their first year and they're straight into working with UNDP, working with real challenges, working with regulators, for goodness sake. If there's any on, I'm being nice to you, really. But these are real challenges, and I'm tremendously proud of how resilient and how creative they've been. So thank you all. Two things left to do. One is I'm going to post it yet again. The link to the students' rooms on the very first event I posted, but I forgot to tell everybody. These people have worked hard. These students have pivoted, resiliated, whatever word you want to use, and they're still here and they're still putting out projects of the type you've just seen. So please do, if you can spend the time now, go and talk to them. If you can't, book a session on the Calendly app that's on their webpage. Link that webpage, put it in your history, and any time over the next few days, click on it and go and have a chat with them. It's as close as we can get to having a real physical space where we can actually just talk about these things and you can listen to what drives them and their final projects that will be coming right back at you in June with their final graduated projects for the show. But before you do that, there's one last thing to do, and all my students know this. Come off mute, please, and give a resounding physical round of applause to Noel and Sarah for two fantastic speeches. Thank you so much. Not a sound you hear very often anymore. So we just like to remind you of what the sound of applause is like. Okay. But thank you very much. Absolutely everyone who's been involved with this event. This show has been just a triumph, and to stand back and celebrate the work of the students and be inspired by all the speakers we've had has been a total joy. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks again, Noel and Sarah. And we'll see you tomorrow. Our last two shows tomorrow on new interfaces. And I've completely forgotten the last one. Somebody remind me. Must be up here somewhere. Oh yes, new interactions and then sustainable solutions at lunchtime. So thank you so much, everybody, and we'll see you all soon. Bye for now. Go and talk to people.
Thank you.
Cheers, Sarah. I'll turn the YouTube off.